Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Tony, we started recording like 5 minutes later than planned, and I told you before we started, I'm very sorry, but it was an unavoidable situation at my house, which was I was on Twitter, saw a link to an article about the 1 year anniversary of Norm Macdonald's passing, so I started reading that. And then, like 2 paragraphs in, there was a link to the appearance where he was on Conan with Courtney Thorne-Smith, and they started talking about Carrot Top. And I was like, well, I'm very sorry, Tony, but I am contractually obligated to watch this all the way through, so it's going to be like, I'm going to be like 5 to 7 minutes late. So very, very sorry, but there's nothing I can do about it.
Yeah, Norm was always one of my favorites, like even before he was famous and he was just like on A&E's and Evening at the Improv. And I remember like my first favorite joke of his was talking about how the answers on like the dating game are always so stupid and risque. And he was like, they get up there and the Bachelorette is like, Bachelor number one, if I was a popsicle, what would you do to me? And he's like, well, first I'd take off your wrapper, if you know what I mean. And then I'd put you up against the counter, if you know what I mean. And then I'd break you in two.
Norm was one of those people where it's like, if you have to explain why this is funny, the person is never ever going to find any of this funny. Like it's either that was like an immediate like you got it or you didn't, and he was your type of comedian or not. I'm going to tie this back into college football with one of my favorite Norm Macdonald jokes, which was Charles Woodson. Norm was hosting the ESPYs in 1998 and honored Charles Woodson. You sort of recognized him in the crowd, and hey, Charles Woodson. First defensive player to ever win the Heisman Trophy. Boy, that is something that no one can ever take away from you. Pause. Unless you kill your wife and a waiter. And I think it was it Ken Griffey Jr.? Someone in the crowd was like, oh boy, did not find that funny at all. But, sorry. I don't make the rules. That's funny.
No, that is funny. And that was typical Norm going after OJ. But this is an Ohio State podcast, so I thought, Tom, why don't we talk about some Ohio State football stuff? First off, let's talk some health updates. Ryan Day on Tuesday said he's expecting to get Jaxon Smith-Njigba back, expecting to get Julian Fleming back, possibly expecting to get cornerback Jordan Hancock back. Mike Hall is good to go. No worries there, just as they expected. No update on Cam Babb. Nobody asked, so I think at this point we just assume he's not going to play. I think if he can, it would be good to get him out there before the Big Ten play starts, but it doesn't sound like that's going to happen. But now with Jaxon Smith-Njigba back and Julian Fleming back, I'm wondering if there's any concern that there will once again be timing issues, and not that you keep them out or anything like that, but will they be able to pick up where they left off, or not even left off, because that first game they didn't, Jaxon Smith-Njigba didn't play much. Julian Fleming hasn't played at all. So will there be timing issues? I think it helps that Emeka Egbuka and Marvin Harrison have played, but now they're going to be doing some different things as they get these other two guys incorporated. But Tom, if there's going to be timing issues, I guess you want it now rather than to start the Big Ten. Are you expecting some, just some rust, I guess?
Rust is probably not a bad way to describe it. I don't think that Jaxon Smith-Njigba and CJ Stroud are going to have to like reintroduce themselves to each other. They have worked together fairly successfully for over a year now, and so this is not, they're not starting from square one. But anytime you got a guy coming back from a couple weeks off, it might be a little rusty to start with. But if they're back this week, if Jaxon Smith-Njigba and Julian Fleming are back this week, this is the week you'd want them back. Really, you'd want them back last week against Arkansas State, but you have a little bit of time to maybe just kind of knock that rust off, and I can't imagine it takes more than a quarter, right? These guys have not been out for 18 months. They've been out, for a few weeks. I can't imagine it takes more than a quarter or so. So, okay, someone runs the wrong direction, or is, the throw is a step off one way or the other or something in the first quarter, and then, they figure it out and they move on. This is a week to just, get the rust knocked off, work on some of the stuff that they have, felt they needed to work on after those first two games, and then you get ready when, Big Ten play starts for real next week.
Jordan Hancock should be back this weekend. Those are the words of Ryan Day. Mentioned that he Day expects him to be in the 2 deep and help right off the bat. So he would be the 3 or the 4 to Ja'Kalen Johnson's 3 or 4, basically. And that said it was a significant injury that he was dealing with. We know he played some special teams in the first game, did not play at all in the second game. Day mentioned that he got some scout work last week, and they still chose to hold him out. Contrast what Day said about him being expected to play this week with what Jim Knowles, defensive coordinator, then said. And when asked about the depth at cornerback, he said, "We'd love to have Jordan back." Now, to me, that sounds like he doesn't necessarily expect him, or is this Jim Knowles now in full control of his ability to follow Ryan Day's rules about letting people know about the health of the players? Like, yes, we'd love to have somebody named Jordan Hancock, and it would be fine if he were to play, but I'm not going to speak to any of that. Is this just him towing the company line, or are you getting mixed signals? I got mixed signals, but as I'm talking it out here now, maybe he's just towing the line.
Well, it's kind of, this is one of those things where you can listen to the same words and you can interpret them 2 different ways, completely opposite ways. We would love to have him back, parentheses, but he's not going to be back this week. Or, we would love to have him back on the field, which we expect to happen, but you don't want to jinx anything, so you could kind of read it both ways. I think this is one of these things. We have typically steered away from this kind of format. I think this is when we really need to steer into the embrace debate format, and one of us takes one of these sides and one of them takes the other, and because this is the kind of thing that we could have a long, pointless, very angry argument about. So I don't care which side of the debate you take, but you get to be Skip Bayless, whichever one it is.
Well, I do believe even an injured Jordan Hancock is still better than LeBron James. So this is fitting. I did like his answer when Jim Knowles' answer about injuries and, how do you feel about it? How do you feel about the depth at corner? And obviously we know they have 6 scholarship cornerbacks and they've had some injuries there. And he's basically said, it is what it is. So I try not to have feelings about it. And it's a very mature answer. It's like, well, it wouldn't help if I was upset about it. So I choose not to feel.
It's so funny to listen to college football coaches talk about stuff like that, because it's, that sort of is the mantra. And that's, Ryan Day's mantra. Every time anyone asks him about the college football playoff, it's kind of like, that's not something I'm going to waste time thinking about because it's not a decision I get to make. It's, that it's like that wasted energy. College football coaches love to think about wasted energy and not wasting energy thinking about things they can't control because they have so many things they've got to worry about, the things they can control. So, yeah, I don't think there's a question that Jim Knowles would like to have better cornerback depth, and I think that's probably true of any program in the FBS who has 6 scholarship cornerbacks, one of whom is injured, and 2 of whom are true freshmen. You saw a little bit of J.R. Brown. I don't know if we saw Ryan Turner last Saturday or not, but I definitely saw J.R. Brown out there at one point. I don't think J.R. Brown is necessarily ready to play yet, and you saw a good bit of J.K. Johnson, you saw a good bit of Cam Brown, a good bit of Denzel Burke. But, now you're one injury away from just having 2 guys. And then, that really limits what you can do. And so, yes, it is probably not surprising that Jim Knowles, answered the question the way he did. But let me answer it for him. Yeah, he's probably a little concerned about the cornerback depth right now, because if I was in his shoes, I know I would be.
The way you talk about the coaches and their energy, I am now imagining like all coaches with energy bars above their head, like video games. This is like Street Fighter, and it's like, oh no, he's thinking too much about the depth, and you see the energy going lower and it's getting into like the yellow. And now he's thinking about, recruiting. Now it's getting into the red. And at some point he's just going to be like almost completely drained, and the get back coach has to just hold him upright. And we got to refuel him. I don't know what would refuel a coach, probably some dip. I don't, it just depends on the coach. Like Vrabel, we need some Skull, we need some Copenhagen, get it out there. And then you see he puts a dip in and it just goes right back, to green. He's like fully energized. And then he can start thinking about stuff again.
The only coach who this doesn't apply to is Mike Leach, because he'll just start talking about pirates or the Renaissance or something like that, and his bar doesn't change at all. It has no impact. It's just a separate part of his brain that his right lobe can be thinking about football, and his left lobe can be thinking about the theory about the Dark Ages not actually existing. That's wild, man, and just no impact at all on the football side.
So true. One other guy who left the game against Arkansas State, Mike Hall, he's all good to go, as Ryan Day kind of expected. And so Jim Knowles was talking a little bit about Mike Hall and like how he knew he would be this good. And we say this good, it's 2 games in. He's got 5 tackles for loss, I believe, and a couple of sacks. But he said he knew, like, immediately seeing his first step in practice that he was a different guy, because not everybody has that ability. And so when you see it, it's easy to see and it's hard to miss. And then, when guys are getting into the backfield all the time, you're not going to ignore that. And then he plays the way he practices, which, Tom, you and I can vouch for that. We've seen it in practice where, we've talked about it before. He was giving Luke Whippler a handful in one practice. And somebody said like they had to kind of pull him out sometimes because they want to get some stuff done offensively. And, that's the sign of a pretty good defensive lineman.
Yeah, we got to watch some of practice the second week of fall camp, something like that. We watched some the first week, and then I think it was the second week that we were standing there and going, oh boy, either the middle of the defensive line is real good or the middle of the offensive line is not very good. And it feels like 2 weeks in, we kind of have our answer on which side of the coin has come up, and it is, boy, Mike Hall might be pretty good at the football thing. So he kind of goes back to, like, when you heard people talk about Chris Olave his freshman year, it was always how he does all these things right in practice, and he always goes about things the right way and does things the right way and finishes the drill and all that kind of stuff. And when you hear people talk about a guy like that, that's almost always someone who's going to turn into something pretty significant. Because, I'm sure there are plenty of walk-ons who are really busting their butts 4 to 6 A to B and all that kind of stuff, and maybe 4.5 to 6.5 from A to B, and then maybe a little bit on the way to C. They're not talking about them because those are not guys who the coaches are thinking about in terms of game readiness and all that kind of stuff. When you hear coaches talk about a guy like that, that tells me, number one, the fact that they're talking about them, unless they were just directly asked and that's the only reason they were, if they're just, they're talking about a guy, that generally tells you they're kind of, game ready or close to game ready because the coach is really thinking about them. And then, when you get that practice, that practice attitude and that practice performance in, that's the stuff that matters a lot to coaches. If you're doing this stuff the right way, that's going to get you on the field a little bit sooner. There was just a report out of Alabama I saw on one of the Alabama websites about Eli Ricks, the former future Buckeye from LSU who then transferred to Alabama, and then he didn't play at all against Texas. And the reason that Nick Saban gave was, well, he didn't like how he practiced. And, that's the kind of thing that really does matter to coaches. So if you're a guy who's a good practice player, like Mike Hall, or like Chris Olave was, that kind of gets you on the field a little quicker than you might have otherwise. And also, it probably has something to do with making you a little more successful when you do get on the field.
Yeah, and Eli Ricks, a preseason All-American, was never even a first-teamer for Alabama at any point in practice or in camp. But, at least he has the preseason All-American honor and accolades that he can put on his Alabama bio. Ryan Day talking about Mike Hall, you have to earn your way here, you have to earn your playing time. He's done that, and then the quote is, at the end of the day, the best players play. And we're seeing that on the defensive line. And we may see it more with Caden Curry, freshman defensive end. We don't need to spend too much time on Caden because I want to get to some Jim Knowles stuff. But I think he's a guy that's going to start seeing the field more because you've got to allow him to see how productive he can be against starters and good offensive linemen. Because if he can be more productive than Tyler Friday or Javonte Jean-Baptiste, then the best players have to play. And so sounds like Day was very pleased with what he saw in that first game. He mentioned that some guys, they thrive in that environment of the actual game and talked about the fog of war that freshmen face. So it's no small thing for a guy to make plays in a game, no matter, like, we all sit and look at it. It's like, this is a blowout. Nobody cares. Caden Curry is like, he's getting to play and he's going through all of his progressions and reads and, like his assignments, and everything is flashing back to him right now, and it didn't matter. And he just, got into the backfield. So I'm looking forward to seeing him, and I'm sure we'll talk about him more in the 19 shows we will do before the game. But I'd like to see him in the first half.
Yeah, I kind of want to see him in that first half as well, because there's always a question, how invested, Caden Curry was going a million miles an hour at the end of the game, where the Arkansas State offensive lineman kind of checked out, where, you never quite know, were they calling very predictable plays that they had shown 6 times earlier in the game, so Ohio State knew exactly what was coming. That kind of stuff. You can mitigate some of those kind of questions if you see him in the first half, and he's, the game is sort of at least somewhat in reach against Toledo, and guys are still trying, and there's no question that guys are still trying. But, I think the thing with Caden Curry is you're talking about this not being a particularly meaningful part of the game. Well, if Caden Curry's a guy who's really thriving in practice, well, guess what? Even the most not particularly meaningful part of a game is still more meaningful than practice in terms of, the attention that you're getting and all of that. So if you are a goes hard in practice all the time guy, it is really not a surprise that you would be a goes hard even in seemingly meaningless parts of the game. And I think he certainly, with as explosive as his performance was, he was, I know, put an asterisk on this because I know we all kind of look at the PFF individual player ratings for individual games with a little bit of a jaundiced eye. But he was the highest rated player by PFF on the defense for Ohio State in that whole game, and he only played 10 snaps, something like that. So he was just very consistently in there making plays, being disruptive. So if you can make an impact there, why wouldn't you want to see that guy get more chances? And if he can do it in the first half, well, great. Then put him in the more meaningful situation. This is a baseball reliever who's really good in the low leverage spots. It's like, well, maybe you should throw him in a high leverage spot and just see what happens. And if it doesn't work, like, okay, great, you can go back to low leverage. But if this is a guy, maybe you found maybe not your closer, but maybe you found a really good 7th inning guy in Caden Curry. So go ahead and throw him out there and see what happens.
Yeah, a guy who goes hard during the game, goes hard during practice, probably goes hard in the parking lot, cutting off teammates for prime parking spots, in line for smoothies in the nutrition area, and just, I don't know. Now I'm creating this unlikable person who's just a pain to deal with inside the building. So maybe that's not what he is, but clearly somebody that they want to get on the field more, and we should expect that. Tom, I want to continue talking about this defense. Particularly, Jim Knowles mentioned some likes and dislikes that he has with his defense, and I want to start off with the zero blitzing and zero coverage, and what that is just however many people you send blitzing. Zero coverage is there's no deep safety. Everybody's in man coverage at that point, basically 5 defenders for 5 receivers, and there's nobody protecting. There's no deep safety, anything like that. So everybody has to really defend their man. And he said he likes doing it. He's comfortable doing that. It forces the offense to prepare for it. And it reminded me of something that C.J. Stroud said after the Arkansas State game, I believe, where he said, like, one of the things that he's been taught is before every snap, have your plan for zero coverage. And you saw that with the touchdown pass to Xavier Johnson. I guess that would have been Notre Dame. So maybe it was after the Notre Dame game when he talked about that. Just always have that plan for zero coverage. And it's something that you always have to think about. And so that's one of the reasons Jim Knowles likes it, is because it forces the offense to just prepare for it and think about it. And even when you're not doing it, they're still having to prepare for it and think about it. So it's not something that you have to do all the time. But also what he likes about just blitzing in general is that when you have an aggressive defense, players start believing in it. And then he calls it, that's when the players start playing offense on defense. And that's when things really start to happen. And we could talk about it now, I guess, and maybe that's what, Tom, when the turnovers start to come as well.
Well, yeah, if playing, a big part of playing offense is catching the ball when the quarterback throws it. So maybe this leads to more interceptions if you're playing offense on defense. It feels like every defensive coordinator who comes into a new school, what do you hear about in the first spring? Going to be an aggressive attacking mentality, and then half the time it ends up being a very passive, sit back, read and react kind of defense. We've heard so many times about Ohio State's defense just not attacking, not being aggressive, not getting to the ball quickly, not gang tackling, not swarming the ball. They always want to do that, and then you look at it on Saturdays and it's like, you don't necessarily see it translate to the field. You have seen it translate to the field this year, and I think that's probably a combination of confidence, players having confidence in themselves, players having confidence in the scheme and the coaching staff, and also just the scheme is designed for them to play fast. The scheme is designed for the linebackers to play fast because the linebackers are not getting blocked by offensive linemen now because the defensive linemen are occupying all those blockers. So you've got linebackers coming clean, on blitzes. You got linebackers getting clean shots at running backs. If the spill and kill model that we've talked about a bunch this fall. So, the defense is sort of set up for them to be aggressive, which football players are not a passive group. Generally you are not choosing to play football if you are the, passive sort of sit back and avoid contact type. Like it is sort of a self-selecting community where you have to be pretty okay with contact and you have to, how many linebackers have you met, Tony, over the years who seem to enjoy contact and sometimes seek out the contact?
Several,
yes, several. So, this is the kind of defense that, not only are players confident in, you get the sense it's the kind of defense, that sort of aggressive defense that players enjoy playing in. And, Jim Knowles seems like he's okay with giving up a big play here or there if you're also making big plays here or there, and that seems, I see the next thing, the next subject on the rundown here. He doesn't seem like a bend but don't break guy to me, does he, Tony?
No, he's not, and we'll get to that. First, I'll go back to the comfort and creative defenses. He said that creative defenses keeps your team engaged, your defense engaged, and that reminds me of the way he teaches as well, and the way he coaches, like the quiz show stuff. Like everything is about keeping players engaged, and when they're engaged, you can ask them to do more. And I liked what he talked about with being at Duke the one year where they played Florida State and Clemson in back-to-back games, and they forced 10 turnovers in those games, but they also gave up 100 points in those two games. So it's like, yes, the turnovers are one metric, but they're not the end-all, be-all because you still have to stop them, and as long as you're keeping them out of the end zone, obviously that's the most important thing. I'm just looking back through all the way from this year to 2009. This is the first time in that stretch Ohio State has forced no turnovers in the first two games of the season. Tom, offhand, do you recall how many turnovers they forced in the first two games of 2016? That would be the Malik Hooker defense, Marshawn Lattimore, where they're very turnover happy. 2 games.
Humor me with the identities of the first two teams they played in 2016.
Bowling Green and Tulsa, I believe.
Bowling Green and Tulsa. Well, I remember multiple pick sixes. There might have been Rajay Burns had a pick six against Bowling Green. Mm-hmm. Someone was it Lattimore had a pick six against Tulsa. They might have had two pick sixes against Tulsa.
I think so.
Yeah, I'm gonna guess they had like 8 turnovers in those two games.
9. They had 7 total interceptions in those two, and then also 2 fumble recoveries from Tulsa in a sloppy weather game. I believe that was a bunch of rain. But yeah, no turnovers yet. This is one of those things where Brian Day and Jim Knowles both talked about how you can't force things. I'm expecting a couple of, over a span of 3 or 4 weeks to get 12 turnovers, or, they'll come in waves and then things will settle down, but it's going to happen. So, don't get too upset. And yes, obviously Jim Knowles does not like it, but you still have to do what you do. And Tom, you alluded to it. The one thing that he does not not like to do is the bend but don't break defense. And the quote was, "I never think about bending but not breaking." Basically, his focus is on getting the ball back to the offense as quickly as possible. And when somebody asked him and just even mentioned those words, you could see just the bristling that he did at the bend but don't break. It's clearly that is not his thing.
No, he is, and that goes. That's the exact opposite of everything that we just said about him. He wants. You just said he wants to get the ball back to the offense as quickly as possible. There are a couple ways you can that in and of itself lends itself to being a little more open to zero blitzing. Because if you're in zero, well, there's a chance you're going to give the offense the ball back in the way that some of those Greg Schiano defenses did, where it's like, wow, that was a really long touchdown pass for the other team. But you're also in the position where potentially you're making a big play to get that offense off the field on third down. You're forcing even if you don't have a sack, you're forcing the quarterback to throw the ball away or do it under pressure where you don't get a good throw off. Maybe you force a turnover. That's something that my bold prediction for this week. They will force at least one turnover. So just put my marker down on that one right now. The turnover thing is interesting because that's something that, from year to year, one of the metrics you always hear Phil Steele talking about is turnovers equals turnaround, where turnovers are by and large luck. If you've got a crappy quarterback who's throwing the ball to the other team, like, okay, that's a little bit of an exception. But so often turnovers are just a matter of, did your cornerback catch it, or did he just get one hand on it and couldn't catch it? If you are, generally speaking, if you are plus 15 in turnovers one year, that's probably going to regress a little closer to zero the next year. If you're minus 15 in turnovers, well, that's probably going to regress a little closer to zero the next year. Ohio State having no turnovers for 2 years, that is a big anomaly historically. That's the kind of thing that just, you've had a bounce here, the Michael Mayer fumble. He was the only Notre Dame player, and it just happened to bounce right back to him. So if it had bounced anywhere else, they probably have a turnover. So you're probably going to see a little regression there. But, you're right. I definitely did not, listening to Jim Knowles talk, I would not have thought him a bend but don't break, disciple. Listening to him talk, like, yeah, man, that is not his game at all, and that is definitely not what you've seen from him. It's not just the preseason aggressive attacking mentality talk. You've seen that on the field now as well.
Now I want to ask him a Sophie's Choice type of question, like, Jim, which would you rather do, bend or break? And he'd probably be like, how many times do I have to break? Is it? Because I would much rather let's just break and then get the ball back to the offense. Is this just one drive we're talking about, 2 drives? Now also, Tom, is Iowa a bend but don't break offense?
Have they bent? I don't know that they've.
True.
I mean, I think they had 92 yards passing for their quarterback last week. I mean, that's not even. I mean, that's not even like you put a paper clip on top of a piece of paper. It's even just a little sag. Like that's barely. You need like highly attuned scientific instruments to detect the bend there on the Iowa offense.
This is like measuring the motion of the Earth as it relates to the moon, and we're getting a centimeter further away from the moon every 12 years or whatever. That's the kind of instrumentation you need to measure this Iowa offense, if you can even call it an offense. Tom, last thing I want to talk about, Denzel Burke struggled in that game against Arkansas State, giving up some catches. Knowles defended him, saying, 99.99% of people can't play cornerback. It's a tough job. Obviously, he got pulled a little bit, and they put in J.K. Johnson in there. And I think, based on some of the other stuff Ryan Day has said this year about how, last year they didn't have guys who were ready to play in the starting lineup. Denzel Burke starting as a true freshman at Ohio State at corner is a very significant thing. I wonder how many years in the last, say, 15 he would have been starting in a normal year with normal depth. And so I think there's something there where you give him credit for what he did, but also take the situation into account and the depth. And maybe we put too much on him or put too many expectations on him last year. And now you're seeing him, I don't even want to say regress to the mean, but he's not been outstanding. I think he's going to be just fine, but maybe he's not necessarily the All-American that we thought he would be at this point. Or maybe he will, and he's just having some moments. But I think it's fair to say that we put too many expectations on him, or maybe we thought too much of him, and that's a kind of a clunky way of saying it. But I just wonder how often he would have started in the last 12 years. I still think he's going to be fantastic, but your thoughts.
That's a good point, because I mean, normally you've got 2 really good, solid corners at Ohio State. I mean, you had that point where there was sort of an assembly line of the guy in his second year was pretty good, and then the guy in his third year turned into a first-round pick, and then the guy from the second year moved up, and then he was the future first-round pick. They didn't have that last year because, the beginning of the year, Seven Banks was hurt and just didn't have a good season at all, and they were a little thin there, and so Burke playing immediately, starting day one, without having seen it that much, without having seen that much of him during the spring and the summer, you didn't know quite how much to put on the because the Sevyn Banks situation was a little bit of a mystery where he was, he wasn't on the availability report, but then didn't play, and it was like, what is going on? And so you didn't quite know how much to put on Denzel Burke and how much to put on, there's, some other guys who, the rest of the cornerback room is probably not up to the normal Ohio State standard for the cornerback room. And, I think part of it is Burke, because still to be able to start as a true freshman day one, that's still impressive. And he had a good year last year, but it was not, he was not necessarily ahead of Jeff Okudah. Jeff Okudah just had better cornerbacks ahead of him his freshman year, because Jeff Okudah didn't start until the Cotton Bowl when Denzel Ward sat out. So, Denzel Burke, if he's sitting behind Denzel Ward and who was the other corner that year?
Gary Conley, Damon Arnett.
It might have been Damon Arnett. But, I mean, again, those are two future first-round picks.
Sheffield.
No, Kendall Sheffield. He might have been 18. But anyway, the point is, you had a couple future first-round picks potentially on that team, and at corner, you didn't have that last year ahead of Burke. So the path to the field was a lot easier. I mean, last 10 years, how many years does he start? 2, maybe? I mean, it is an anomaly to have a defense where there's a true freshman who's good enough to start and, is one of the best options to start. So, yeah, I saw Ross Fulton make this point on our board at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Sign up today. That he probably wasn't quite as good last year as everyone gave him credit for, but he's also not as bad right now as everyone is acting like he is. This is not someone who used to be a future NFL Hall of Famer and now is a bum. Like that's not the, this is more about expectations than it is necessarily about performance. And yes, I'm right there with you. I think Denzel Burke will be just fine. Not a real concern. And he is not the only guy who has gotten taken off the field as a result of play in the first couple of weeks. That just seems like that's another Jim Knowles thing that just is sort of the expectation. It does not mean they've lost confidence. It's just that's how they're going to do it.
Yeah, and obviously nobody wants to get yanked or benched, but it has to feel good for Ryan Day that they have the depth to do that. And it's something that he hasn't had much of the last couple of years, and certainly not at defensive back. And now you can be like, we're going to pull our best corner and put in a redshirt freshman. And you know what? I think we have enough guys to do that. Whereas last year, you're just like, well, Josh Proctor's out, so Bryson Shaw, we need you out there for 70 snaps a game, and whatever happens, happens. And, that's just the situation that we're in. But now they've got depth, and they've got guys like Lathan Ransom trying to get on the field, Josh Proctor trying to get on the field. Court Williams still can't play. I mean, he's a team captain and can't get on the field. So they have depth, and they're going to be using more and more of it as guys get healthier like Jordan Hancock. Tom, anything else that you wanted to touch on before we get out of here?
Nope, that's all you had on the rundown, and I put no independent thought into the show at all today. So therefore, if you're out of stuff, I'm out of stuff. So I have to put together the morning shows. I can tell you all about the morning show, but I think we've exhausted our topics for today's show.
Good job, Tom. You good read card. You read everything I wrote down just perfectly. So nice job on your part there. So that will do it. As Tom said, BuckeyeHuddle.com. Check us out there. Find us on YouTube at youtube.com/BuckeyeHuddle. If you have not yet subscribed, do so there. Hit that bell. Be notified. And 5-star ratings and reviews on the podcast platforms that you listen to is always welcome. And we do always appreciate that. Makes for some good reading at times. So thank you guys for joining us, and we'll talk to you all later.